So I'm going to keep this very informal. I've never talked to any class ever about anything. I was always actually pretty bad at speaking up in class. But there's a lot to say about this project, which originally started about 2007. And it was at that time that my mother passed away. And I thought, what better tribute could I do than to put some pictures together and set it to music and have that nice Ken Burnsian look, and then put it up on YouTube, which is what I did after actually showing it at her memorial service. And it was something that I was very proud of. And I felt I had really not produced anything better than this, like, ever. And when my father had passed in 1989, we didn't really do any gravesite or memorial or anything. We had 3 memorial services in New York, LA, and North Carolina, but there was nothing really to commemorate. The closest thing that we did was I flew to Africa with his ashes, and I spread them over the wildebeest migration. And by helicopter, I had a video. I did it by flying by, and so I had a video of the ashes coming out. But that wasn't good enough. So that same year, Vanity Fair came out with a 19-page tribute to the Esquire decade, and that affected me in such a way that, who gets 19 pages in Vanity Fair 18 years after you're gone? And that maybe I had actually missed something, because growing up with my father, he was the editor of Esquire magazine, okay, but none of my friends read Esquire. He might as well have been the editor of Popular Mechanics or something. Just I had no really idea growing up what it was about. So I figured, let's go and do a film, because I actually, at the very beginning, wanted to always become a film director. And while I was in high school, my father knew this, and he had a talk show in New York on Channel 13. He would always have these movie directors on as guests. And he would inevitably ask them all, if you have a high school kid who wants to be a movie director, do you send him to film school or do you send him to liberal arts? And they would all say liberal arts, because everything that you could learn in film school, supposedly, you can learn on a film set in 3 or 4 months. Anyway, that was the theory, and off I went to Wake Forest. And there was a filmmaking course with Dr. Burroughs, so I was at least appeased a little bit. But overall, I was able to actually exercise my interest in filmmaking through Dr. Burroughs, and also whenever there was an opportunity to somehow avoid writing a paper or something, I would make a film and turn that in. And I made like 2 films like that were counted as papers. I think Dr. Shorter took my Miller's Tale that I production, and he counted it as 3 papers. And I thought, yes. My dream to become a movie director after Wake Forest continued. And the first job out of college was to be the assistant to Peter Bogdanovich, this movie director in Hollywood, who I had grown up with. At the age of 5, I remember playing with the zippers on his boots. He'd come over. And so he was always kind of around, and he was this guy who, when I was 7 or 8, would come by. He came by in this convertible that my mother had found him, with his wife and his one-eyed dog, and they waved goodbye with this big TV set in the back seat, and off they went to Hollywood. And he made it in Hollywood. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds great. That's what I want to do. I just want to drive off to Hollywood and become a big movie director. So, first job out of college, I worked for Peter Bogdanovich, but that was kind of of a weird experience because the movie I worked on which had Audrey Hepburn in it, also had Dorothy Stratton in it, and this was a huge scandalous tabloid murder that happened while I was working with him. And so immediately after being asked to work with him in Hollywood, turned around and went back to New York and got into television as an associate producer. And then, I don't know, for years I kept still trying to become a movie director, but always kind of veering the course into some other kind of visual-related job, but not becoming a movie director. So that leads me to this project. This is my first film as a movie director, and it's like 40 years later. And I only realized that I became a movie director when I showed it to a friend. He said, "Well, where's your directed by credit?" And I said, you can't direct documentaries. Then people might think you've manipulated the truth. I always thought you just produced documentaries. And he said, no, you're a director. So I put my director credit up there, and I became a movie director by default. So now that I guess through the years I had acquired equipment and knowledge of how to put images together. And so with a camera and knowledge of how to edit videos, I set out to make this film. So maybe it's a good time to run the trailer, so this will kind of set you up for what it was that I was chasing.
Squire stretching across the top. For me, he was simply God. To the rest of the country, he was Harold Hayes, editor of Esquire magazine. Having been too young to understand what was going on, I embarked on a journey to find out what made him become what some have said, the greatest post-war magazine editor ever.
We were it. He brought together the greatest group of writers in that period that was
That's the trailer. 4 minutes. Some say a little too long.
And if you couldn't hear it, it's also on YouTube, so I apologize
Oh,
for
yeah.
the audio quality. We're not wired in here, right?
So I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know whether to put me in it or not. If I did, how much? If I did, in what context? In the present or in the past? Historical present, or I was confused on. And I started seeing some other documentaries, other benchmarks in the form, such as My Architect, which is one of the great documentaries made some years ago, where the son of architect Louis Kahn searches out to understand more about his father, and discovers that his father had 3 wives and 3 families going on simultaneously. So, that was hard to compete with. But I knew that if it was going to be good, it had to be that compelling. And the pressure to create something that good was just all around. And I didn't think Esquire in the 60s would come anywhere close to that. Also, I didn't know anything about Esquire in the 60s, really. So, I began to read Carol Palsgrove's book, which she had written some years ago about Esquire in the 60s. It's called It Wasn't Pretty Folks, But Didn't We Have Fun? I read it 3 times. I still couldn't, I had to read it even more because there was so much information packed in there. And what could I do from the whole picture of this magazine and all the stories that were collected to make it into a movie, a film that would be 90 minutes long or 60 minutes long, and make it entertaining and somewhat compelling. So I knew that I couldn't really have an answer right away, and that documentaries are either scripted, or not. And I thought, I guess I just asked Peter Bogdanovich, because he had just finished a documentary about Tom Petty, how do you do this? And he said, these things unfold. You get to discover what it is that you don't know, and they somehow come together. You can't really plan that much in advance on a documentary. I mean, if you went to an interview, you wanted to get this person to say this, that's one thing. Which actually later on in my production, I did manipulate or calculate what I wanted from such as Hugh Hefner. I went out to the mansion, I lied a little bit and said that I had distribution. And I knew that Hefner had modeled Playboy after Esquire when he started to go. And I wanted him to somehow pay tribute to Esquire. And in the film, if you see it on Sunday, which is at 12:30 at the Aperture, I got him to say that Esquire was not allowed in his house because it was an adult magazine. That was worth the flight. I mean, it was just, and I knew that's what I wanted to get out of him. And I asked him, how many interviews have you done about Esquire? And he said none. So I felt, quite privileged to be the first, but that was down the road. My first interview, because my sister said, you've got to interview Robert Frank. And I thought, Robert Frank? I'd never even heard my father mention Robert Frank. And Robert Frank is this great photographer who did a book called The Americans, which was sort of changed the face of photography in the late 50s. He was pals with Jack Kerouac and the whole Beat generation. And he'd also made a documentary about the Rolling Stones, which they didn't like, and so he was never able to actually show it anywhere unless he was present. So I really actually had no idea why my sister said call Robert Frank, but she said, your dad was really close with him. Okay, so I looked in the phone book, and there's Robert Frank listed in the phone book. So I called, and he answered the phone, which was remarkable that I thought, here's a guy that actually nobody gets an interview with Robert Frank. And he picks up the phone, and he actually agrees to let me come down. He wouldn't have us in his studio because he thought the lights would be disruptive. But I said, well, if you come out onto the street, would that be okay? And he said, yeah, sure. So we came down. It was pouring rain, and I knocked on the door, and he came down the stairs, and he forgot that he had committed to an interview. And it was pouring rain, and he didn't want to come out in the rain, so we ended up in the studio with him, and in this kind of bohemian-looking location. And I really didn't know what to ask him. I mean, I started to ask these sort of very cryptic, awkward questions, not knowing really where it was going to lead. And he sort of sensed that I really didn't know what I was talking about, so he turned the whole thing around and started interviewing me. And it was like, well, were you close with your father? And in the end, I only took one soundbite, but it was, I think, more or less just to show that I got the Robert Frank interview. But from there, it was like, who else can I get? And it was starting to collect, and my first instinct was to go after the obvious characters who's always sort of kind of very prominently associated with my father, like Tom Wolfe and Gay Talese. So my first letter was to Tom Wolfe. And I thought, oh, this is going to happen really quickly, no problem, Tom Wolfe. I write a letter, I actually leave it with his doorman, I don't mail it. I thought that would be more impressionable. And there's no answer from Tom Wolfe. And then I started calling his publisher, and I didn't really have the right phone number to his home, and I don't know, it actually ended up taking me 2 years to get Tom Wolfe, who was the most obvious choice. And the reason that finally I got was because he was in the middle of writing a book, and I guess he was so immersed in that process, he didn't want to like distract it. But also, his good buddy, my father's nemesis, Clay Felker, had died that same year that I had written the letter. And maybe he felt like he didn't want to go cross the tracks after his buddy had passed away. But I eventually got him, and he told some nice stories. And Gay Talese had also wanted to be last, so I couldn't really get Gay Talese until I had Tom Wolfe. And I finally was telling Gay Talese, I don't have Tom Wolfe yet. And he said, well, what number are you calling? And I said, this number. He says, that's not the right number. Call this number. So it was Talese that gave me the right number to get to Tom Wolfe and finally get him. And then I got Talese, who was wonderful and also very sharp. And I was able to get him to recount the entire making of Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, which is the quintessential magazine article of all time. It's a perfect example of what would be called the new journalism, where they used fictional techniques to report on non-fictional events. And so he was very generous this time to do that. But then there was all these other people that I had to go chase down, and it was pretty much an adventure. And the next person that I was sort of I thought I had to go after was Gore Vidal, because people said, you better get Gore, he's getting a little slow, and make sure you get there before noon. Peter Bogdanovich, actually, we knew Gore Vidal arranged for the interview, and Gore said, sure, come on over, and he wouldn't really commit to a time, so I had to sort of fly out and kind of be around when it was convenient. And sure enough, we got there in the morning, and still, the scotch arrived at about 11. And, I did this whole interview, and he kept just drinking scotch on camera, and I had to sort of like edit around, I think, when he wasn't holding the scotch. And it was difficult there, too, because I really didn't know exactly what to ask and what to find out from him. I did know that there was this big battle between him and William Buckley that my father had sort of hosted in the magazine, and where they both sort of called each other names in subsequent months and ended up suing each other. And I got him to recount that whole tale. And in the editing process, I felt that it was much too long and detailed, and he would fall asleep. And I did a cut where I tried it out, and they put some images to support his storytelling, but it didn't work. So in the film, you see, I've used only like very short sound bites, but very provocative, and it's always, every time I've projected it, it's a winner with the crowd. They all laugh, and because he's a very provocative character. Gore Vidal was a privilege, actually, to be in his company. And then there was people like Nora Ephron, who I never really understood her connection to Esquire. I never really understood her relationship to Esquire. And when I contacted her, she said she had maybe 15 to 20 minutes of material. I still did. There, again, I had no idea what she was going to say, or the 15 to 20 minutes were what questions I should ask. And so, in prepping myself to do these interviews, I was able to do several things. One was on eBay, which is a great tool for research and acquisition, I'll tell you. There's a company in Florida that sells single-issue Esquires for a range of price. And this guy has taken the table of contents of every issue, and he's put it on to help sell the issue, whatever issue he's selling on eBay, as a text file. So I was able to go in for every issue and copy-paste the text file into a separate Word file for each issue. And I created the entire 10 years of issues that my father was the editor. And if I was trying to search for something specific, I could just go in and search the Word files, and up would come what I was looking for and tell me what issue I could find, whatever author or whatever article I was looking for. So it was a great tool. But then I also had to have the issues. And my father had given his papers in Esquire, his personal Esquire collections were hardbound volumes, and to scan the images of the pages of Esquire, single issues was really the only way to do it. So I had to rebuy every single issue on eBay, which got expensive, but I was able to buy really, not perfect copies. I just was interested in content and images, and so I got bottom of the barrel. And that leads me to one other story, which was how I got into the Palm Springs Film Festival, which when I finished the film, that was in January, where I had my world premiere. So I'm just kind of jumping around here, but it's an eBay-related story. I was looking for the July 1960 issue of Esquire, which was the special New York issue. And I went on eBay, and there was this beautiful specimen of July 1960 Esquire. And there was a woman in Vancouver who was selling it for $85. And to help sell it, she described the magazine as the issue where Harold Hayes took a risk and hired Dion Arbus to go out and do her first magazine assignment. In addition to that, also Gates Lease was first published in the July 1960. So I sent her an email, or contacted her, and I said, thanks for plugging my father for selling your July 1960 issue. How about $50? And she came back and said, well, I've got a second one. How's that documentary coming along? And I thought, well, this is just somebody on eBay, who knows that I'm doing a documentary. Well, the trailer was on YouTube, so if she was interested, she would probably have stumbled into it. But so we became friends, and she sold it to me for $50. And then she told me her brother was the director of the Palm Springs Film Festival. And she forwarded the trailer to him, and he came back and said, this is great! I want to present it, he's going to fly him out and all this. And so I figured, well, that's what I got to do. I got to go to Palm Springs because of eBay and have my world premiere there. And so that's what I did. But that may be a mistake. I don't know if you people are documentary filmmakers, but what I've learned is that if you're selling something to the public for distribution, what some people use to find distributors is something called a producer's rep. And a producer's rep will take your production and introduce it to distributors, and they will be very specific on how the beautiful film is unveiled to whomever they want to sell it to. And they want to have that control. And I kind of learned this kind of late, because I'd already gone to the Palm Springs Film Festival and let it be seen. Several of the major, big, important producer reps said, "I'm sorry, we can't touch it, it's been exposed." And I thought, what? So I had a hard time getting producer reps to return my calls or even talk to me. It was harder to talk to producer reps than it was to distributors. So, finally after all this kind of like, snubbing the product from the producers reps, I figured, well, I can get to the distributors. So I started figuring out ways to do that. One example was, even 3 weeks ago, I wanted to hit the AMC networks, or just the network that owns or produces Mad Men. Because I thought, aha, just like Mad Men, right? The real Mad Men, real Don Draper. So one of my stunts that I did was I went out and bought a typewriter at a flea market for $30. And it was a portable Italian typewriter. And I typed this beautiful cover letter like, "Dear Mr. Saban," who's the president of the network. "Here, I've just finished this film. You've got IFC Films, you've got AMC Networks, you've got Sundance Films, Sundance Network. Where do I start? Could you please advise? Because I don't know where to go." So yesterday, or 2 days ago, I get an email from the Senior Vice President of Acquisition and Production for IFC Films. I've just received this inquiry from Mr. Saban, and we'd love to see your film and love to evaluate it. So after that experience, I figured, I don't need producers reps. So I'm continuing to do the festivals. This is my second festival at River Run. And whenever you go to these festivals, they make you feel like you're a rock star. They fly you in, they put you in the hotel, the press comes around, and they put you on TV, and it might be a false reality, but it's not a bad couple of days. So if you can actually somehow get into an ongoing, some people actually travel festivals as a living, and you can command some license fees from some of these festivals, and just do only that for a year. But after a year, your film is kind of over and it's done the rounds, so it's hopefully found a home someplace. This film still has not found a home, and is desperately looking for a home, and will also need probably a champion to take it to where it needs to go to make it distribution ready. Okay, I'm finished making the film, but what makes it ready? Making it ready is making sure all the rights are cleared. And in this film, 2/3 of it are images from other people. And in today's day and age, when you're sitting around trying to figure out, okay, I've got this story this person is telling, what can I put there? Well, where do? You go to Google Images. I need a picture of Norman Mailer. There's a great picture of Norman Mailer. It's a high resolution. I can just put it right there, and it works perfectly. And then you start to do that over and over again, and you realize you've got a great film, but you've taken a lot of the images off Google Images, and you don't have the rights to use any of this stuff. So there's two ways to go here. One is go and knock on the door of the person who owns the rights to the image, negotiate a license fee, and hope that you can get something worked out and everybody's happy and you get to use the photograph for $500 per image, which is like kind of the average price that you might pay. And a lot of the images I'm showing here are only on screen for 2 seconds. So $500 for a 2-second image is crazy. I've got 1,000 images in here. That would be $500,000. It's like, and that also goes with stock footage. I didn't have a lot of stock footage that I had at my disposal because my father was always kind of camera shy. He was on the Merv Griffin show in the 60s, and I think the entire time that he was on, because I was in the audience, he had his hand in front of his head. I mean, I got lucky with some Canadian footage that had been in there. But anyway, through the making of all this, somewhere I knew that this was going to be a problem. And, you know, I didn't have any money. I did a Kickstarter campaign to try to raise money for some kind of abstract number that would maybe pay for all of this. But I didn't hit my goal, so I, was supposed to get the money back. But since most of the people who had given money were people that I knew, I told them, please send the money anyway. And they did. So I had a certain little bit of ammunition to go out, but nowhere near what I would need to go licensing every single image. So then I went to a Christmas party, and there was a bunch of filmmakers standing around. Oh, what you doing? What you doing? And I said what I was doing, and I said I was really nervous about all of my images. And then this person said, well, I'm a teacher at the American University, and we have a whole fair use program there. And I said, fair use? And so I started to understand more about what fair use was. And then I contacted the American University, or the woman who wrote the book, and the head of the program, and she said, you sound like a poster child for fair use. And we can also hook you up with another law school in New York, and they can do clearances, and we'll work together, and we'll make this thing happen somehow. And I said, great. And this is like free law school, so I didn't have any money anyway, so I'm getting free legal counsel to somehow figure out a way that I can use all of these images legally for free. So I can't stand here and tell you that's what's going to happen, because the end of the second semester, that both schools have taken this project through 2 semesters now. It's coming up for, I guess, the end of the whole process. So I will find out in about 2 weeks, really at the end of the day, where I'm liable. And where I'm probably most liable is at the photo agencies, where they say, in order to use our site, you have to register. And when you register, you have to sort of digitally sign that you agree to pay for their litigation if you're sued by them. And so that's a big question right now. And there's, I guess, a manageable amount of images that fall into that category. But at the end of the day, the way it was explained to me, and I'm not sure if this is explaining it the perfect way on fair use, but as long as you don't detract from the value of the original copyright too much, or at all, and you're using the images to report, teach, a critical analysis of some sort, educational reasons, and that it's only a small part of the total of what you're making, then it's legal. And so what they end up doing is something called a fair use analysis. So this one law school in American University did a fair use analysis for 1,000 images. And with that, you then apply for something called an E&O, which is an errors and omissions policy with an insurance company. And with that fair use analysis and the application, the E&O, if the agency approves of your fair use analysis, you are then distribution ready. As long as the distributor doesn't say, well, I don't like your fair use approach. You have to go out there and get everyone to sign a release. If that happens to me, I don't know where this film will go. Unless Susan Lacey at American Masters hands me $1 million and says, I love it, please go clear everything. But anyway, it's been an experience.
Is American Masters essentially looking at it?
I got it to Susan Lacey. I shot Nora Ephron's interview in Susan Lacey's home. But she goes, hi, I'm Susan Lacey. I run this show called American Masters. And I said, hi, I'm Tom Hayes. Doing stuff about my father, Harold Hayes. Oh, is that anything like Gail Sheehy? Which was the wife of Clay Felker. I said, no, not really. Then she went upstairs and I did my interview with Nora Ephron, and that was it. So I don't think she really gets Harold Hayes. She's doing more high-profile kind of people. I met someone this week who just got a meeting with Susan Lacey and $1 million to go do a documentary. And I thought, so, you know, people,
They just did Carl Sandburg,
did they?
and the author of the Carl Sandburg biography is Penny Niven.
Oh, really?
Who's very prominent in that.
She's close with my stepmother, actually.
So
Yeah.
that director who had his career here was still years ago. Maybe he could help me out.
What's his name?
I don't know.
Uh,
I don't know. The Penny would be the one.
Oh, yeah. Well, my stepmother, Judy Kessler, is another friend who's close with Susan Lacey, and she took it to her, and she said that she would watch it, and she never got back to me or her. And I go, see, what people will do is they'll take your project, sure, yeah, and they'll watch it, or they'll say they'll consider it, and then they just don't call you, and they don't tell you what they thought. Or, you know, it's, as Peter Bogdanovich said, that's how it works in Hollywood. If they don't get back to you, they've gotten back to you. But so I've been turned down by Showtime and HBO. It's kind of a quirky little documentary because it's not Ozzy Osbourne. It's Harold Hayes, and it's kind of like an unknown soldier that did great things, and no, certainly the people that were.
I saw it back a year ago. I thought it was terrific. I think there's an audience there.
Well, a lot of people say that, and you know what? I feel really good because it's a film. It's changed since you saw it. It's 98 minutes now, and it's a film that makes you laugh and it makes you cry. And I think any film that can make you laugh and cry is a good film. It's taken you, it's transported you somewhere and taken a hold of your emotions. And hopefully you walk away having learned something. And I think you do learn something from this. You learn a lot, and it's a capsule of a time period. Time capsule. Anybody have questions? I mean, I've been talking, my God, 40 minutes nonstop.
It's not that hard.
Maybe 5 more minutes, I can get on a lecture circuit.
Exactly.
I want to ask about one of your dad's friends, Dr. Cheryl. He died before we did this.
About 2007, 8.
I was thinking Cheryl worked it the whole time while he was at Esquire. And how well did you know him, and how would you define that relationship?
Bob Sherrill was wonderful. When I was a kid going into the office, he was one of my safe havens where I knew I could go hang out. You know, so it was either Byron DeBell's office with managing editor or Cheryl's office. So I'd go over and hang out with Cheryl. And Cheryl came in, I think not at the very beginning. He came in kind of like early 60s. Harold came there in 1956 originally, and took a year off to go to Harvard in 58. But I remember Cheryl would come up to the country with us. He had like 2 adopted kids. But he was always kind of fun and character, and my father always thought of him as the editor who would always submit ideas without being asked. And I even remember when we left Esquire, we would still be in California sending in dubious achievement ideas and pages of ideas. But he was also kind of a loose cannon. There was a couple of incidents where he nearly was fired, but he came out of Wake Forest and was part of the student magazine, the original core of journalists that came out of the student magazine. Also, did some illustrations.
Yeah, right. And of course, when he retired to North Carolina, he continued to write. Won an award for one of his pieces in Esquire.
Right.
He did a number of things in Durham. He was here when your dad's papers were dedicated, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
20 years ago, whatever. And he was a vivid character. I still remember fondly.
I have him, it's on videotape that whole weekend. He was there. He makes a remark about Harlan Ellison, who's in here also. And when I reviewed these videotapes just recently. But you have a question?
Yeah. Have you been able to gain any traction with working with, I guess, the current administration at Esquire, with them maybe like bringing
Good
this
question.
maybe-
Well, one of the first things that was one of my first things that I thought I should do would be to clear the avenue over at Hearst Corporation, which currently owns Esquire. And so George Lois, who I had talked to before going there, said, "Oh, you don't need to ask permission, just get pissed with it." I said, I really gotta go ask permission. So Kathy Black was the head of the magazine group, and at the time that I asked, I just wrote a letter. She had somebody reply, and they came up with an agreement that basically said, "Go ahead, but if you get sued, we don't know you. Go at your own risk. We don't have any money. Sure, you can come to our closet and scan some single issues, and, So that was about the extent of the Hearst Corporation's contribution to the project. While one of the days that I was scanning, I came out to the hallway. David Granger, the current editor, was standing there waiting for the other elevator. I looked like a bike messenger that day because I was riding my bike. And I just yelled out, "You're David Granger, and I'm Tom Hayes." And so we shook hands and we went down the elevator, sort of trading Arnold Gingrich stories or something. And then I said, love to interview you, which was kind of a half lie, really, because he had nothing to do with Esquire in the '60s. And that was the last time I saw David Granger. But trying to reapproach the company for help or some kind of second asking, maybe they would change their mind. It was just a constant distancing. And I felt it was both personal and corporate ego in the way. So it is what it is. And there's also, starting this month, the Esquire Network, which is a co-venture between NBC and the Hearst Corporation. And they have seen it, and I got actually an email today saying, "We like your film, but we're only doing series and not one-offs or movies. So maybe later down the line, we'll think about it." But if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. So go into the fire and hopefully win at some point. Are you all documentary students?
Well, I was just going to say, I teach a documentary theme first year writing class.
Oh.
So they're filming documentaries of their own, their first year students. In our class, we've always been struck, we've been talking a lot about how much footage there is initially, and of that, what an actually small proportion in many cases actually ends up in the film, what gets selected. What
Bonus
gets left
material.
out.
Bonus material on the DVD.
There you go.
Yeah, okay.
And you seem to have some interesting stories about how you selected or omitted certain materials, like holding the rum. And do you have any other stories about what led you to make certain choices about what to include, what to
Well,
omit?
it's trial and error, and if you have the power to own a camera and know how to shoot it and also know how to edit, then you can take the time to try these things out, because it is actually only time. There was a time when it was money too, but everyone seems to know how to shoot and edit. I mean, it's taken the money thing out of the equation. At the point where I wasn't sure how I would be in it or not. I mean, I was doing these sequences of me walking down Madison Avenue looking at Don Draper, looking at Brooks Brothers window, these clothes that looked like something out of the early '60s, and then I realized it doesn't work.
You're doing research in here.
Yeah.
We had a shot.
Yeah, right,
Research,
exactly.
It didn't make it in.
You didn't make it in.
Bummer. It was a
I
exciting
didn't know
shot,
then.
too,
I didn't know then, and I think I didn't like looking at myself. You know, it's just, nobody likes living for themselves. But as far as the material, the interview material, you know, I think you just, you start an interview and you don't know really where it's going. Maybe you know what you want to try to get out of them, or maybe you understand what it is that's why they're important, or you don't. And at the end of the interview, you kind of process what was good. And even though you might have thought this was a great interview, there may be no place for any of it, which is what happened a couple of times. I had some great interviews where I just didn't use anything. And now I'm really like scared to like invite these people to come see the film. And it's like, you wait. And there was like one guy who said, "Well, I wish you had a little more of me in it." You know, it's like, and that was also the problem, was because everybody who I interviewed had much more to say about what they did than what they did with interacting with my father. And it was all about my father that this was about. So I had to really sort of take a minority of the footage where they actually talk about interacting with my father and what that was like, and position that way up front against what they did in their experience. I mean, but I still had to include, you know, some very pivotal things like the Andy Warhol soup can. It had nothing to do with my father. It had everything to do with George Lois and Andy Warhol. But it was on my father's watch that it happened. As editor, he was in charge of whatever went into that magazine. So whatever happened in that magazine had something to do with my father. But that's what's hard to understand about what a magazine editor is. You never really understand, you know, you can come home and say, "Ah, here's my new magazine," but you have no idea what he did. So it was coming to grips with the fact that everything in that magazine he did, because it was his ass on the line, whatever was in the magazine. So, but it's a hard kind of message to get across to everyone. I mean, people just don't understand it's that much liability on the line.
When did Esquire magazine get started?
It was started in 1933. Arnold Gingrich and William Weintraub and the Smart Brothers all got together in Chicago, and it already had some other magazine called Apparel Arts, which was a fashion trade magazine that had samples of fabrics for the tailors to choose what was going to be hot, and they figured out that they should do a male version of Vogue for men, and put Hemingway and Fitzgerald and make men's fashions, you know, manly. And so in '33 that evolved, and it was an immediate success. But it's also had a lot of controversy in its development, because the airbrushed nudes in from Vargas and George Petty and the post office started to see that as a little bit promiscuous, and they threatened to take away their second-class postal license, which they fought and won on a First Amendment claim. And it was because of that magazines like Playboy found ways to distribute to the postal system.
I just have a follow-up. And was your father one of the longest editors at Esquire, or was that?
No, Gingrich was there longer. Gingrich founded it, but he left in the late 40s and came back in 51 or 52. My father was effectively editor only for 10 years, but he had been there longer, like 17 years. I think Lee Eisenberg, who came later, was there longer.
Whose interview was the most fun?
Fun. Well, George Lois is a lot of fun. Nora Ephron was a lot of fun. It was always an adventure, because, okay, now I'm going to sit down and you're going to tell me about my father. You know, so everything was fun. To have that kind of access to A-list writers, photographers, and designers willing to tell you things that you never knew from their perspective or how they saw it. It was just an extraordinary privilege.
This
I know you've done it.
this would be a pretty good question for the students.
Kevin, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
How do you know when the project is done? Like, how are you able to just say, okay, I'm not going to get any more interviews, I'm not going to try to find out any more?
Well, the Coen brothers said your film is never done until it's never finished. It's when you abandon the project. And you know, even seeing it Wednesday, and I for some reason I can sit there and watch it over and over again. I don't know what kind of disease that is, but I still see things where like need to fix. The film does need a sound mix, but nobody else will know that except for me. You know, it would be great to surround helicopters in the background for Vietnam. And there's some color correction that still stand to do. So you're always finding something else you could have done. But you know, getting back to the excess footage, there is a lot of great material still that I didn't put in the film, and you can do bonus material for your DVD. And DVD is not out yet; it's not obsolete. It's in fact still generating huge revenue in the industry, and you can get some good deals out of DVD distributors. So I think having a bonus material section is important and important for planning if you're doing a DVD release in Blu-ray.
So knowing everything you know now about the process, what would you have done differently starting now?
Well, you know, I did try to get money first.
Yeah,
But I didn't get
it.
it.
Just didn't work.
No, I went there. ITVS has a program where you can write a proposal, and they give up to $350,000. But you know, the chances of getting that is pretty slim. It's about the same chances of getting into Sundance, which is like 12,000 films are submitted to Sundance, 140 are taken, and how they actually watch 12,000 films and decide. And I was talking to the River Run people about that, and they said, you know, sometimes filmmakers will send a blank tape just to see if people will watch it. Which I think the next time I would do that.
You've tried that?
Yeah, I can't imagine. But you know, I think it's also it's a really tough thing now because the films are getting really, because everyone can make a film, and a lot more people can make good films. And so a lot more good films are being made, and and only so many of those good films actually get to see the light of day in terms of the public distribution. So, you know, I think there's probably a lot of undiscovered great films just sitting out there after people have sweated to death to make them. And so I don't know how encouraging that is for young documentary film students, but Sheila Nevins, who's the head of HBO documentaries, had a film festival where the film festival is still around called the Full Frame Festival, which I think is in Chapel Hill now. It was started right after 9/11 and right around when Tribeca Films was starting up. And she gave a little introduction to her little festival, and she said HBO is a place which has great budgets for documentaries. It's a place for documentary filmmakers to stop off and have a good lunch. And that always stuck in my head, so I don't know. I don't think it's anywhere. No, there are people who are actually doing, I guess, regular productions. They've got their names up there and they can get anything made. But I think to get to that point, it takes a certain amount of luck and perseverance. And if you really want it, you'll get it. But it's not for the faint of heart. I did it, almost an hour.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Tom.
Well, thank you.
If you have seen, or even if you've seen Tom's film at the Words Awake, the new version there's a lot more material in it, so it's worth going to see the Sunday showing at have for sure to see the full film. It's really.
Well, the old
interesting
version
how
was
it's
called
done.
Editor Uncut. Now
Right,
it's called
right.
Smiling Through the Apocalypse,
Right, right.
which is actually taken from an anthology that my father put together of all the great writing from, not all the great, some of the great writing from the 60s in Esquire. And the preface of the book is may you live in the most interesting of times. And that's a traditional Chinese curse. So, but I've done that.
And feel free to look around. As Tom alluded to, Harold bequeathed his papers to Wake Forest in 1989. And we have a few things out which are a tiny bit. It's a very large collection. If you see the film, if you have seen the films, you'll recognize a lot of the materials.
The original letter from Nora Ephron.
Yeah, original letter. It's a fascinating collection. If you see the film and want to know much more about it, just coming and reading through the files is fascinating because it is the first-hand stuff. It's Harold's own.
But see the movie before you come.
See the movie first, yeah, because then you'll recognize. Oh, I saw it in the movie. But feel free to look around and talk with Tom and like I said, and see the film on Sunday if you have. So, thanks again.